Everybody's looking for a place to belong. In a peaceful village nestled among rolling hills lived a young man. He yearned for something more than the simplicity of his life. He dreamed of adventure, of a world beyond the familiar fields. His heart echoed with a restless beat. One day, the young man approached his father with a bold request. He asked for his inheritance, his share of his father's wealth, while his father was still living. He wished to make his own way in the world, to forge his own path. The father listened patiently, his heart heavy with a mixture of sadness and understanding. He knew the restless spirit that burned within his youngest son. Though it pained him to see his son leave, he loved him unconditionally. With a sigh and a heavy heart, the father agreed to his son's request. He divided his wealth, carefully measuring out the inheritance that rightfully belonged to his youngest. As he placed the young man's share in his hands, a silent tear traced a path down his cheek. He prayed for his son's safety, for his well-being, and for his eventual return. The young man, filled with a sense of exhilaration and freedom, gathered his belongings. He bid farewell to his family, his heart brimming with dreams of the adventures that awaited him. With a final wave, he turned his back on the life he had always known and stepped into the unknown. The road stretched before him, a ribbon of possibility winding its way towards the horizon. He walked with a spring in his step, his heart filled with the promise of excitement. He carried with him the love of his father, a silent blessing that would follow him on his journey. And so he journeyed onward, his spirit soaring with the thrill of the unknown. The young man journeyed for days, leaving behind the familiar landscapes of his childhood. He crossed rivers and valleys, his heart growing lighter with each passing mile. He marveled at the sights and sounds of the wider world, the bustling cities and vibrant marketplaces that greeted him along the way. The world was a tapestry of colors, smells, and sounds, a stark contrast to the quiet rhythm of his village life. He embraced this new world with open arms, eager to taste all that it had to offer. He spent his days exploring bustling markets, his senses ignited by exotic spices and shimmering silks. He sampled delicacies he had never encountered, his taste buds tingling with each new flavor. The young man, so accustomed to the simple life of his village, found himself immersed in a world of luxury and indulgence. The young man, eager to experience all that life had to offer, surrendered to the allure of pleasure and excess. He frequented taverns filled with laughter and music, where wine flowed freely and stories were exchanged over overflowing tankards. He found himself surrounded by a whirlwind of new faces, each one eager to share in his laughter and his wealth. He danced with women whose beauty rivaled the moon, their laughter music to his ears. He lost himself in the rhythm of their movements, the warmth of their embrace, and the intoxicating scent of their perfumes. He surrounded himself with musicians who filled his days and nights with vibrant melodies. The music, a potent elixir, carried him away on waves of sound, drowning out any lingering doubts or fears. For a time he lived in a constant state of exhilaration, each day a celebration, each night a feast for the senses. Word of the young man's generosity and zest for life spread like wildfire. He became a sought-after companion, his wealth attracting a coterie of artists, merchants and nobles, all eager to bask in his favor. He moved among them with an easy confidence, his laughter infectious, his spirit magnetic. He engaged in witty banter with merchants, their conversations laced with promises of exotic goods and lucrative ventures. He debated art and philosophy with learned men, his mind stimulated by their knowledge and insights. He found himself welcomed into the homes of nobles, their grand halls echoing with the sounds of music and laughter. He believed these companions, these newfound friends, were drawn to him by his character, his charm, and his zest for life. The young man, caught in the whirlwind of his newfound life, built for himself a fleeting kingdom of pleasure and extravagance. He purchased a grand estate, its walls adorned with intricate tapestries and its gardens overflowing with exotic blooms. He filled his home with treasures from distant lands, shimmering silks from the east, intricate carvings from the south, and sparkling jewels from the north. Each acquisition fueled his desire for more, his hunger for possessions growing with each passing day. He hosted lavish parties that became legendary, his name whispered in hushed tones in the finest establishments. Guests flocked from far and wide, eager to partake in his boundless generosity and experience the intoxicating freedom of his lifestyle. He had achieved what he thought he desired: freedom, independence, and a life lived on his own terms. As time passed, a subtle shift occurred. The laughter in the grand halls of his estate began to ring a little hollow. The young man, though surrounded by a multitude, felt a flicker of unease, a whisper of loneliness that he couldn't quite silence. He noticed, with a growing sense of disquiet, that his fortune, once seemingly inexhaustible, was dwindling. The chests that had overflowed with gold coins now held only a fraction of their former wealth. The merchants, once so eager to extend him credit, now greeted him with thinly veiled impatience. The weight of his dwindling fortune, the fear of losing everything, pressed down on him, casting a long shadow over his gilded cage. The young man, once accustomed to the finer things in life, found himself facing a harsh new reality. The weight of his dwindling fortune pressed down on him, a suffocating blanket of worry that he couldn't shake off. The grand halls of his estate, once filled with music and laughter, now echoed with an unsettling silence. He paced restlessly from room to room, his footsteps echoing on the marble floors, a stark reminder of the emptiness that surrounded him. The gardens, once bursting with life and colour, lay neglected, the once vibrant blooms wilting in the summer heat. The young man, accustomed to the constant buzz of activity, found himself surrounded by an eerie stillness, a tangible symbol of his fading fortunes. He withdrew from the company of his companions, ashamed of his dwindling wealth, his pride wounded by their thinly veiled pity. The young man, desperate to maintain the illusion of his former wealth, reached out to those he had considered his friends, his companions in his pursuit of pleasure. He sought their support, their counsel, their loyalty in his hour of need. But his pleas for help were met with empty promises and averted gazes. The merchants who had once courted his business, their faces wreathed in smiles, now greeted him with indifference, their eyes filled with a calculating coldness. The nobles who had welcomed him into their homes, their tables laden with delicacies, now shut their doors to him, their laughter no longer reaching his ears. He realized with a sickening certainty that their friendship, their loyalty, had been conditional, built on the shifting sands of his wealth. The young man, stripped of his wealth and abandoned by those he had considered his friends, found himself facing a harsh new reality. The life of luxury and indulgence he had built for himself crumbled around him, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. He was forced to sell his possessions one by one to settle his debts and stave off the creditors who hounded his every step. The treasures he had amassed, the silks, the jewels, the intricate carvings, were snatched away for a fraction of their worth. He wandered the streets, his stomach gnawing with hunger, his heart heavy with despair. The grand estate, once a symbol of his success, was seized by creditors, its doors bolted shut, its windows dark and lifeless. The young man, once accustomed to the warmth of companionship, found himself utterly alone. He wandered the city streets, a ghost of his former self, his spirit broken, his dreams shattered. He slept in doorways and alleyways, his body shivering in the cold night air, his mind haunted by memories of his past life. He had become invisible to those who had once courted his favor, his presence unnoticed, his existence irrelevant. He was just another face in the teeming crowds, another nameless soul lost in the labyrinthine streets. He had squandered his inheritance, alienated his family, and destroyed his reputation, all in the pursuit of a fleeting happiness that now seemed like a distant dream. Now, stripped bare, he was forced to confront the consequences of his choices, the bitter truth of his self-inflicted exile. As the days turned into weeks, a flicker of hope began to stir within the young man's heart, a faint glimmer amidst the darkness of his despair. He thought of his father, his kind eyes, his gentle smile, his unwavering love. He remembered the warmth of his home, the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread, the sound of his family's laughter echoing through the halls. He realized with a painful clarity that he had been a fool to chase after empty dreams, to seek fulfillment in material possessions and fleeting pleasures. He had traded the true treasures of life, family, love, belonging, for a counterfeit happiness that had left him empty and alone. A deep longing for home, for forgiveness, for redemption began to consume him, a powerful force that pulled at his heart, urging him to return to the place where he truly belonged. The young man, lost in the depths of despair, clung to the memory of his father. He pictured his father's face etched with wisdom and compassion. He recalled his father's gentle touch, a source of comfort and reassurance. The thought of his father, a beacon of love, in the darkness of his self-inflicted exile, sparked a flicker of hope in his heart. Even the servants in his father's house, he realized, lived better than he did now. A plan began to form in his mind, a desperate hope for redemption. He would return home, he decided, not as a son but as a servant. The young man, his heart heavy with regret, replayed his past mistakes. He saw the pain in his father's eyes, the disappointment etched on his face as he had demanded his inheritance, his voice filled with youthful arrogance. He remembered the carefree laughter, the joy he had so carelessly pursued, the fleeting pleasures that had cost him everything. He had traded the true treasures of life, family, love, and belonging for a counterfeit happiness that had left him empty and alone. The weight of his actions, the consequences of his choices, pressed down on him with suffocating force. He had squandered his inheritance, alienated his family, and destroyed his reputation, all in the pursuit of a fleeting illusion. He had sought fulfillment in material possessions, in the company of strangers who had used him and then discarded him. He had chased after empty dreams, only to find himself lost and alone in a cold and unforgiving world. The young man, humbled by his experiences, knew he was no longer worthy to be called his father's son. He had betrayed his father's trust, squandered his inheritance, and brought shame upon his family name. He would approach his father, he decided, as a humble servant, begging for forgiveness, for a chance to atone for his sins. He would offer his labor, his sweat, his very being, in service to the one he had wronged. He would tell his father, "I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants." He clung to these words, rehearsing them in his mind, each syllable heavy with remorse. He knew he didn't deserve his father's forgiveness, didn't deserve the love and compassion that had always been freely given. But a flicker of hope still burned within him, a desperate prayer that his father's love might yet extend to a son who had strayed so far. With a newfound determination, the young man turned his back on the city that had witnessed his downfall. He set out on the long road home, his tattered clothes flapping in the wind, his bare feet blistered and sore. The sun beat down on his back, his throat parched, his stomach growling with hunger. He slept under the stars, his dreams haunted by memories of his past life. He was determined to return home, to seek his father's forgiveness, to find solace in the only love that had ever truly mattered. After what seemed like an eternity, the familiar landscape of his childhood appeared on the horizon. Rolling hills, dotted with sheep, sloped down to the village nestled in the valley. A wave of emotion washed over him. Relief, anticipation, and a deep abiding fear. He saw the smoke curling from the chimneys of the houses, smelled the freshly baked bread wafting from the village bakery. He heard the distant barking of dogs, the laughter of children playing in the streets. His heart ached with a longing for a life he had thrown away, for a love he feared he had lost forever. He had rehearsed his words, planned his humble approach. He would beg for forgiveness, offer himself as a servant, anything to be welcomed back into the fold. As he descended the hill, his pace quickened, his heart pounding in his chest. He was so close, yet the distance between them felt insurmountable. The weight of his sins, the shame of his actions threatened to crush him. Unbeknownst to the young man, his father had never given up hope. Each day the father climbed the same hill his son had just ascended. He would gaze at the road, his heart aching with a love that refused to die. He would stand there for hours, hoping for a glimpse of a familiar figure. He remembered the day his son left, the youthful arrogance, but he also remembered the love, the laughter, the bond they had shared. He clung to the belief that his son was still good at heart. He prayed for his son's safety and return. Each night he would retire to his chamber, his heart heavy. He would stare at the empty chair, the silence a reminder of his son's absence. His faith, though tested, never wavered. He believed that one day his son would find his way back. On this particular day, as the father stood on the hilltop, his heart heavy with a familiar longing, he noticed a figure in the distance. The figure moved, slowly, haltingly, its shoulders slumped with fatigue. As the figure drew closer, the father's heart leapt into his throat. He recognized the gait, the way the figure carried itself, even from this distance. It was his son, his beloved son, returning home. A wave of emotion washed over the father, joy, relief, an overwhelming surge of love that erased years of worry and heartache. He wanted to run, to shout, to embrace his son right there on the road. But then he noticed his son's appearance, the tattered clothes, the emaciated frame, the look of shame and defeat etched on his face. The father's heart ached for his son's suffering, for the hardships he had endured. The young man, his head bowed in shame, trudged towards his father. He had rehearsed this moment countless times, planned his words carefully, prepared himself for rejection, for anger, for anything but the overwhelming love that awaited him. As he neared his father, he stumbled, his legs weak with exhaustion and emotion. He fell to his knees, his eyes fixed on the ground, his voice trembling as he spoke the words he had clung to for so long. "Father," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." He couldn't bring himself to look at his father, couldn't bear to see the judgment, the disappointment he was sure he would find there. He waited, his heart pounding in his chest, for his father's response, for the condemnation he felt he deserved, but the words never came. Instead, he felt a hand on his shoulder, a touch so familiar, so comforting it sent a wave of emotion washing over him. The father, his eyes filled with tears of joy, couldn't bear to hear another word of his son's self-recrimination. He had waited so long for this moment, prayed for his son's safe return, and nothing else mattered. He bent down, his arms encircling his son, pulling him close, holding him tight. He felt his son's emaciated frame tremble against his own, heard the muffled sobs escaping from his throat. "My son," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "you are home." He didn't need to hear explanations, didn't need apologies or promises. All that mattered was that his son had returned, lost, and now found, dead, and now alive. He called out to his servants, his voice filled with a joy that resonated throughout the house. "Bring the best robe," he instructed, "and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet." He wanted his son to feel the full extent of his love, to understand that he was welcomed back without reservation, embraced by a grace that knew no bounds. News of the young man's return spread through the household like wildfire. Servants rushed to fulfill the father's wishes, their faces beaming with joy. The young man, clad in the finest robe, was led to his father's side. The father raised his hand, silencing the murmurs. "My son," he declared, "was lost and is found. He was dead and is alive again." And so a celebration began. Music filled the air, and laughter echoed through the halls. The father embraced his son, his heart overflowing with love and forgiveness. The son, humbled and grateful, accepted his father's embrace. As they sat together, the son knew he had truly come home. The story of the prodigal son is a timeless testament to love, forgiveness, and the true meaning of home. It reminds us that no matter our mistakes, there is always a path back to redemption. The father's unwavering love transcends anger and disappointment, symbolizing hope and healing. True love is unconditional, offered freely and without reservation. True happiness lies in family bonds and the embrace of forgiveness. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest stories.